Sorry about that, babe.
King's Field II, aka Kingsfield here in North America and Europe, was developed by FromSoftware and published by ASCII Entertainment in America and Sony Computer Entertainment in Europe. Released on February 14th of 1996 in North America and December of 1996 in Europe respectively, King's Field II was actually one of the first RPGs released on the Sony PlayStation in America. It's the sequel to the Japanese-only first entry in the series titled Kingsfield. If you'd like to see my review and playthrough of that, I'll make sure to link it in the pinned comment description below. The reason that I keep mentioning the European version is because that's the version that I ended up playing for the channel and technically will be reviewing. While I do own the North American copy of the game as well as means to record it off of real hardware effectively, I really do enjoy the DuckStation emulator, which is surprising for me, I know. And due to various frame rate issues across not only DuckStation but other means such as playing on the PS3, I heard the same for the PS2, the European version runs as intended with a steady frame rate on DuckStation. Story. The story of Kingsfield is pretty cool. The intro cutscene and manual give a deeper lore dive on the areas of retitled, Melanat, etc., but keeping in line with my usual review style, the gist of the game's story is as follows. Alfred, the king of retitled, resided over his country with peace and joy. But of course, monsters started appearing in the caverns near retitled and King Alfred wanted to destroy them, but oh no! The fabled Moonlight Sword had been stolen. Without it, the monster slaying couldn't be done. So he sent a search party looking for the sword to no avail. However, they did find a note hinting that Necron sought after the sword and lived on a mystical island known as Melanat. From there, Alfred sent his soldiers to the island and they were never heard from again. That's where you step in. As the king's best friend, Alexander, you get the rundown from King Alfred and are sent to Melanat to get the Moonlight Sword. As you could guess, your ship to the island was attacked, the king's men were all lost at sea, and you wake up on Melanat, ready for your journey ahead. Graphics. For those familiar with the first Kingsfield, you could tell that the graphics in the sequel are improved here. However, it goes without saying that they are not amazing by any means. They are truly a time capsule of that era of gaming. Some might think that they're just downright hideous at this point, but for me, it adds to the mood. Adds to the charm, and quite frankly, it just works. Sure, some of the enemy designs could be goofy, there's not a whole lot of detail going on, but what's there to me is effective at the very least. Music and sound. A mixed bag, but what is there is pretty damn delectable. First to sound. Overall, it's pretty early PS1 style. The slow and sluggish nature of the game is actually captured quite well with the sounds. But with that being said, they don't really do a whole lot for me. I don't find the swipes, the magic spells, the attacks from the enemies and so on to be that satisfying. It's more, I don't know, just kinda there. But where Kingsfield II shines is the soundtrack. Man, this is an atmospheric banger. Composers Koji Endo and Kaoru Kono, sorry if I butchered that, did an amazing job crafting wonderful tracks for each of the areas in the game. With the amount of trial and error in exploring, many of these tunes will be burned into your memory, but in a good way. The haunting mystery feel of the West Shore track where you start, the dark and ominous tones of that around the villages, the dramatic and catchy upswings for both the cathedral and Necron's Colosseum building the anticipation of the end that is coming hard. And man, the ending credits, amazing. Part of it sounds like something straight out of Studio Ghibli. I found myself listening to the soundtrack days after completing it, and honestly, it's just friggin' awesome. I can't say enough good things about the soundtrack. Controls. Alright, let's call it like it is. The Kingsfield series, heck, even games like Shadow Tower and Eternal Ring, they aren't exactly known for their controls. It's a slow, clunky, and plodding game, and as such, the controls match that, for better or for worse. It definitely takes time to get used to the movement, the combat, menuing, so on and so forth. But when you do, it's not that bad. Becoming a master of strafing certainly helps smooth things out, but most importantly, this sprint button is your friend. Tired of moving so slow? Sprint. Getting good at strafing? Sprinting helps speed up the process of that too. Again, I can't sit here and say like this is playing Bloodborne or anything. In fact, it's more like if you mix together a turtle with demon souls. But the charm, man, you know? Yeah, it might be a FromSoft simp, but let me do what I need to do. Gameplay and fun factor. Alright, time to buckle in and get ready for a long section. Kingsfield 2 does a lot of good, has some middling aspects and a few bad. Let's go over them. The good. Kingsfield in general is built upon exploration. The game encourages it by way of not only natural exploration and level progression, but there's also tons of items to be had, a bunch of secrets to be found, and so forth. The journey feels rewarding, and that's something that's paramount in a game like this. You never want to feel like, I don't feel like getting that, I don't feel like looking here, or what have you. Coupled with the exploration aspect of the game is the combat. While clunky and slow, I find it to be very satisfying, especially when you get it down pat. Much like the first game, you have a power and magic bar. When the power bar is higher, you deal more damage. When the magic bar is full, you're able to cast your spell of choice. These bars refill at different speeds based on your build. There are plenty of weapons to choose from, giving you varying weapon speed and distance, a litany of magic spells that buff, heal, and attack, and the sprint button helps with enemy evasion and positioning, and getting some good circle strafing combat down is oh so rewarding. The difficulty, like many games in the catalog of FromSoftware, is always talked about. I feel that the difficulty of King's Field 2 in particular is just right, especially after getting down the mechanics of the game. Of course, there are some classic FromSoft moments, such as the King Kraken at the beginning. Yeah, I advise not bothering until way later. Sometimes you could stumble your way too far ahead into a tough spot, but with a little common sense you should kind of realize, I probably have to come back here as well. But in general, as long as you save often, maybe make an extra save or two, just in case you need to go further back into your journey, you should be fine. In fact, I didn't even really need to grind that much in King's Field 2, which was great. In a way, I guess that's sort of a lie. I ended up organically grinding a lot as I searched for the elusive spider sword drop late in the game, but in general it was pretty much a natural progression. The thing that stands out to me the most regarding the difference between King's Field and King's Field 2 is the vastness and connectivity. King's Field 2 feels huge compared to the first. More areas to explore and more ways to get lost. Thankfully, you're able to unlock some shortcuts once in a while, like that of near what I would dub the hub area of the game, the fountain, and you also have a warping gate system. You get up to 3 different keys, the star, moon, and sun, and you could place them in guideposts near save spots and then use the corresponding gate item with little magic points to warp back. Strategic placement of these keys could help go a long way in making your life much, much easier. Going back to the jump from King's Field to King's Field 2, it kinda reminds me of the jump from Dragon Warrior to Dragon Warrior 2, where the second installment was just massive in scale compared to the first. Now don't get me wrong, I think that jump in particular was way bigger than the King's Field jump, but it just kinda reminds me of it. Maybe a little less on the scale aspect and more on the interconnectivity and going back and forth more so than we did in the first installment. I don't know, you kinda get my drift, right? Oh yeah, something also worth mentioning. There's no loading screens aside from turning on the game and saving pretty much. Yeah, so pretty much once you get going, you're going. Pretty interesting bit and cool bit here from the PS1 era of, please wait, loading. The middling. The various towns in the game can be pretty fun. They have an ominous nature. They feature interesting NPCs, including many merchants, and they even have some secrets and Easter eggs. But truthfully, the towns are a bit samey and somewhat confusing to navigate and sort of hard to remember the layouts of, at least for me. Speaking of NPCs, there are actually some quests present, but all in all, they're not super intricate, nor super memorable. They're just kinda there. Normally this would be a good thing for me, but the timing was key. And what I'm referring to here, of course, are the late game weapons, armors, and areas that are more or less optional. Immediately jumping out to me are the ice and fire caves. There's really no reward for going through these areas, or a lot of other areas and things that you could find, aside from just being a completionist and gawking at how cool some of the things are. As far as actual effectiveness goes, the things that you find in these later areas, they would have been better used had they been paced out earlier in the game. They're almost irrelevant at that point. The bad. Now, I'm not trying to say King's Field 2 is invulnerable here, because it's not. I mentioned it already, but I'll yet again reiterate probably the biggest issue with the game and series is that of the slowness and clunkiness of it all. This is usually an instant turn-off for some gamers. But I do wish that everyone gives it a fair shake regardless at some point. Coupled with that are some areas filled with massive slowdown, the aforementioned graphics being kinda as well as the sound effects, and a touch back on the last bit from the middling section, the tail end of the game. Aside from Necron's Coliseum in the final area, the tail end sorta drug on a bit. I don't want to say that it overstayed its welcome, but it kinda felt like it was starting to, if that makes sense. Conclusion. Growing up, I did not own or know anybody that owned or played these games at all, and I'll fully admit that my love for the modern FromSoft library was the sole reason that I went back to try titles like the first King's Field and Eternal Ring a few years ago. But man, I am glad that I did. King's Field 2 in particular might be my favorite of the bunch so far. There's something about that low poly style, the slow first-person exploration, foreboding OST and atmosphere, searching that next alcove, looking for that next secret, looping some sad sack enemy in a magic/attack combo, and then finally reaching that epic moonlight sword. It's just so satisfying. Regardless of the clunkiness and technical shortcomings, FromSoftware was and continues to be masters of atmosphere and immersion. Through 2 King's Field games, I am hard-pressed to name another game that immerses me more than these. I am so excited to get to King's Field 3 as soon as possible, as well as King's Field 4, aka the Ancient City. But oh yeah, back to King's Field 2, right? I give King's Field 2 on the PS1 a 8.5 out of 10. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to check out my first ever playthrough of King's Field II, check out the pinned comment description below or the end screen. And you could also check out those areas for an unboxing and a quick look at the strategy guide. Take care.